On May 23, 2015, the book entitled Canada's Dismantlement Completed was transmitted to opposition members of Canadian Parliament as well as US activists. The transcript of this video forms the US portion of the suffix to that book. Please note that as much of the pre-military war's tools of war are financial, and as the forecasted and manipulated global market crash has already begun, viewers may wish to visit my financial site www.sidklein.com so as to authenticate the requisite expertise in the topics discussed in the book, which includes this videoed suffix to it. The book itself is available at sidkleinpoliticalblog.blogspot.ca. The only worthwhile effort is the campaign to create a democratic political infrastructure in the U.S., since the creation of democracy would prevent the unfolding calamities while allowing all outstanding American problems to be resolved by the people. Without the possibility of a minority government, there is no democracy. Democracy necessarily requires the possibility of a minority government, since it is, as Rousseau summarized in the social contract, the expression of the general will, which is the highest common denominator among the majority of the people. A two-party system appeals to the lowest common denominator and therefore corrupts democracy's requisite political infrastructure. Therefore, U.S. activists and writers must assemble a team of people from all walks of life to call for a parliamentary system of government which necessarily allows for the possibility of a minority government, thereby obviating the need for so-called bipartisan agreements which, apart from being extremely difficult to achieve, allow for corporate collusion, since the game is rigged by giving the appearance of democratic discord even as corporations fund both sides. Also, since the general will refers to the highest common denominator among the majority of the people, negative campaigning would be replaced with constructive policy statements and more honest election promises, since negative campaigning and simple bad-mouthing of the opponent is symptomatic of a non-democratic two-party system in which politicians need only appeal to the lowest aspect of the citizenry's psychology, replete with fear-mongering and the hatred of foreign and domestic enemies for the purposes of creating nationalistic unity. Certainly, we can all think of countless examples of such nationalistic techniques throughout history. In the U.S., non-ethnic nationalism simply demands a greater hate factor to unite the people. Such so-called unity is shown to be what it is on examination of an ever-uptrending murder rate: hate. Such a team must include people from all walks of life, from Ross Perot-style patriotic heroes to major artists of all stripes, as well as business and spiritual leaders, activists, writers, athletes, and others. Organizational skills are required, and the platform must underscore the evolutionary process by first asking citizens if they would even wish to have an alternative offered to them in the first place. It is fine if the process takes as much as 10 years, but the public's general will would, at least and most importantly, become a matter of record. Of course, all of this is conditioned upon nothing being rigged again in the U.S.'s electoral system. Certainly, Americans would benefit from seeing who opposes even asking the question, while noting the means that those parties would employ to threaten democratic expression. Thomas Jefferson wrote that the people should assume the right to bear arms to overthrow the government once it would become obvious that the government had overstepped its bounds. Building on the Patriot Act and the aforementioned unilateral declarations by the U.S. military that it may occupy foreign countries in the Americas whenever it would deem doing so necessary, and replete with providing proper education to minorities and others only after expressing a willingness to serve in the military, the U.S.'s ruling elite has certainly manifested that which calls for replacement by a new system. This is also consistent with the U.S.'s own Constitution's appeal for an ever-improving manifestation of democratic political infrastructure. Therefore, while the U.S. Constitution calls for an ever-improving expression of its manifestation of democratic government, its true founding father also called for change under the very circumstances that confront the U.S. citizenry today. However, when Thomas Jefferson called for citizens to take up arms under today's circumstances, Mr. Jefferson could not foretell just how obscenely violent the U.S. would indeed become. Therefore, a violent overthrow would not be a revolution, since it would merely be more of the same. By definition, therefore, in this case, the U.S. revolution would necessarily need to be a non-violent evolution. The unfortunate game changer would be if the corporations were to not even allow the evolutionary question, similar to their careful dismantlement of the serious threat that had been posed by Ross Perot and his desire to create a trinity by evolving the role of the Electoral College, an approach that would have proved ineffectual anyway due to the implicit deficiencies of the U.S. governmental infrastructure. Still, the corporation saw that Mr. Perot was on the right track, and he had to be discredited at all costs. If the people were to note who are the opponents of such change, well, then the message would be clear, and the citizenry would be caused to and be free to respond in kind with the will of the U.S. Constitution and the guidance of Thomas Jefferson in hand. Activists and writers for electronic media have no organizational leadership skills to match their other and extensive virtues. They play the major and fundamental role of reporting on what corporate-sponsored news does not. It is their greatness that they understand that without a free press there is no democracy and by extension, therefore, no protection of human rights. A free press, it has been argued, is even more important than human rights since the former cannot exist without the latter. And this is indeed precisely what we have seen from Guantanamo to the streets where citizens used to have the right to freely protest and without fear. Certainly here in Canada before Governor Harper. Frighteningly, government controls the corporate media as a display of yet another shocking symptom of fascism and its system of government in the U.S., which stands atop the ripe ground for it, namely a two-party political infrastructure. While activists and writers deal with one major issue at a time, they have failed to recognize a few basic facts, or they simply would not, or simply do not know what to do about them. Firstly, they must recognize that problems in the U.S. have merely accumulated over time and have actually worsened in nature throughout the decades as that country accelerates towards global war and domestic upheaval. Secondly, they must accept that their efforts are visible to only a tiny percentage of U.S. citizens. Thirdly, the latter implies that their efforts are performed to be personally rewarding since those energies give life to their patriotism. In the expression of their efforts, they defy American nationalism, yet those efforts do not respond in any practical way toward the resolution of anything. Man, though easily led and therefore stupid, is fundamentally good. That is why, in the history of the world, no democratically governed people have ever declared war on others except in self-defense after war was declared on them by a belligerent party. The U.S. Revolution never took place, rather merely a violent overthrow of colonials for the purposes of furthering capitalist ideals, which I'm not judging here. Safe to say that no one should believe that a democracy-serving political revolution ever took place. The overthrow merely set the stage for further acts of violence of like nature by expanding its borders through a series of acts of imperialism. Of course, this culture continues today. Jeffersonian democratic will, reborn or forever eradicated. Whether in Canada, the U.S., or anywhere in the world, it is time to trust democracy and the peoples it intends to serve. The alternative is hellacious, as we have come to and continue to see, with the very and unimaginable worst yet to come otherwise.